The world did not end with a roar, but with the sound of 3 crisp claps, slow and deliberate, like a judge's gavel falling on the ruins of her life. Elara stood frozen behind the counter of Velicor, her tiny shop of forgotten scents and restored stories. The air, usually thick with the comforting ghosts of sandalwood, aged paper, and drying lavender, was now poisoned by the cheap, aggressive cologne of the man who had just delivered her death sentence. Julian Thorne. His name was a whisper of corporate poison, a synonym for elegant demolition. He did not smash things. He simply uncreated them, peeling them away from the world with a signed piece of paper and a smile that never reached his eyes. And today, he was uncreating her. The eviction notice was a pristine, cold rectangle in his manicured hand, a stark contrast to the warm, slightly warped wood of her counter, a counter she had sanded and oiled with her own hands. Velicor. She had named it after the strange, wistful nostalgia inherent to places that hold old books. It was a sanctuary, a 10 by 15-foot poem tucked into a forgotten cobblestone lane in a city that was rapidly shedding its soul for glass and steel. Here, Elara did not just sell perfumes. She sold memories, a scent that captured the rain on a tin roof of a childhood home. A fragrance that smelled like a beloved, faded leather-bound journal. She was an archaeologist of the heart, and her shop was her sacred dig site. Every bottle on the rustic, salvaged shelves was a testament to a feeling, a moment rescued from oblivion. It was more than a business. It was the physical manifestation of her own fractured soul, meticulously glued back together after a lifetime of being told she was too quiet, too dreamy, too much. And they had laughed. Julian Thorne hadn't laughed alone. He was flanked by his twin sycophants, Larson and Peck, whose suits were as expensive and devoid of character as their souls. When Julian's slow claps echoed through the small space, they had joined in, a sparse, mocking applause that was more violent than any shout. A truly quaint endeavor, Miss Lies, Julian had said, his voice like silk wrapped around a blade. He picked up a bottle of a fragrance she called First Frost, a scent of crisp air, distant wood smoke, and the faint, sweet promise of apple cider. He uncorked it, sniffed with theatrical disinterest, and recorked it with a dismissive click. Charming. But sentiment doesn't pay the city's new tax premiums. This entire block is being rebranded as the Thorn Nexus, which requires space for innovation. Not this museum of melancholy. Elara's hands, usually so steady when blending precious oils, trembled beneath the counter. She could feel the eyes of the street outside, curious and pitying, through her large, pan-glass window. The window where she had painted her shop's name in elegant, gold-leaf cursive. She saw her reflection superimposed over Julian's smug face, a woman with eyes the color of a twilight storm, and hair the shade of dark honey, pulled back in a simple braid. A woman who had built a fortress of quiet beauty, only to have its gates blown open by sheer, unfeeling avarice. "You can't," she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "The lease has been legally acquired and terminated," Julian finished, his smile widening a fraction. He placed the eviction notice on the counter. "You have 72 hours. I'd suggest packing up these lovely little potions." His gaze swept over her shelves, and the derision in it was a physical blow. Larson snickered, nudging a small, hand-painted ceramic jar of chamomile and vanilla balm. It teetered on the edge, a slow-motion ballet of impending doom, before crashing to the floor. The shattering was obscenely loud. The sweet, calming scent that burst into the air felt like a final, cruel joke. They turned and left, their polished shoes clicking a rhythm of finality on the cobblestones. The bell on her door jingled, a sound that had always been welcoming, now a taunt. Elara did not move. She stood, a statue of disbelief, watching as the three men paused outside. Julian pointed a finger at her shop front, then at the building next door, outlining his grand, invisible design. Larson and Peck laughed again, the sound echoing down the lane, mingling with the distant hum of the city they were reshaping in their own cold image. 72 hours later, Ilara stood on the same cobblestones, her life packed into a dozen cardboard boxes in a rented van. The gold-leaf Velicore was already being scraped away by a man in overalls, the letters dying flake by golden flake. She watched as the sledgehammers first bit into the delicate woodwork around her window. The sound was a sickening crunch, a sound of bones breaking. With each blow, a little more of her light was extinguished. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a tectonic shift happening inside her, a continental plate of hope grinding itself into dust. She was not just losing a shop. She was being erased. The city, under Julian Thorne's command, was consuming her memory, her proof of existence. As the last of the fog gave way, revealing the naked, ugly lath beneath, a single, searing thought branded itself onto her soul. This would not be her end. It would be her origin. If you believe revenge isn't evil, it has the voice of justice rising from pain. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Revenge. The apartment she retreated to was a gray box on the wrong side of the city, a place where the light came in tired and dusty, and the silence had a different, hollow quality. It was not the peaceful quiet of Velicore. It was the silence of a vacuum, of a life put on hold. The boxes from the shop sat in the center of the living room, a cardboard monument to her failure. For days, Ilara did not open them. The thought of releasing those captured scents into this sterile, joyless air felt like a desecration. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of her grief. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her body a heavy, foreign object she was forced to carry. Sleep was a fleeting visitor, chased away by the phantom sound of shattering ceramic and mocking laughter. When she did sleep, her dreams were of falling gold leaf and Julian Thorne's smile, a white, hungry slash in the darkness. She would wake with a start, her heart hammering against her ribs, the taste of ashes in her mouth. The city outside her window continued its relentless metamorphosis. Cranes painted black against the steel-wool sky became the constant fixtures of her view. She watched the skeletal structure of the Thorne Nexus rise, a beast of glass and ambition, its growth a daily reminder of her own diminishment. News articles, which she forced herself to read with a masochistic determination, praised Julian Thorne's vision. He was a pioneer, a visionary reshaping the urban landscape. There was no mention of the little perfume shop he had crushed into the dirt to make room for his legacy. She was less than a footnote. She was a smudge that had been wiped clean. Numbness was her only armor. She would stand for hours in the shower, the hot water scalding her skin, feeling nothing. She ate when her body screamed in protest, the food tasting of nothing. The vibrant, sensitive woman who could discern the faintest note of sorrow or joy in a fragrance was gone, replaced by a vessel of pure, unassailable ache. She felt like one of her own abandoned bottles, sealed tight, the essence inside slowly turning rancid in the darkness. One afternoon, driven by impulse she didn't understand, she finally opened one of the boxes. It was the one labeled fragile base components. The smell that erupted was a physical blow, a time machine made of molecules. Sandalwood, vetiver, oak moss, ambergris. It was the smell of Velicore, the smell of her own hands at work, the smell of safety. The wave of memory was so potent it buckled her knees. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold wall, and for the first time since the eviction, she wept. It was not a gentle crying. It was a raw, guttural unleashing of everything she had locked away: the humiliation, the powerlessness, the profound, soul-deep sorrow for the beautiful, fragile thing she had nurtured and lost. The tears did not bring peace, but they did burn away the numbness. In its place was a cold, clear void, and into that void, a new sensation began to seep. It was not hot or frantic. It was a slow, glacial creep, a crystallization of intent in the deepest, coldest part of her. It was rage, not a wild, flailing anger, but a quiet, focused, and absolute fury. It had weight and density. It was patient. She stood up, her legs steady for the first time in weeks. She walked to the window and looked out at the gleaming skeleton of the thorn nexus. The setting sun struck its glass panels, setting them on fire. It was no longer a monument to her defeat. It was a target. Julian Thorne had built his empire on the graves of small dreams. He believed that because he could not smell the stories in her shop, they had no value. He believed that because his name was on a building, it was more permanent than the memory in a scent. He was wrong. Ilara turned from the window and looked at the boxes, no longer seeing a tombstone, but an arsenal. Her knowledge was her weapon. Her pain was her fuel. Her silence would be her strategy. The huntress had been awakened, and she would move not with a roar, but with the silent, inexorable patience of a shadow. The transformation began in the silent hours of the night. Ilara cleared her small, spare bedroom, turning it into a laboratory, a war room. The old, scarred table became her workbench. The boxes yielded their treasures, beakers, pipettes, amber glass bottles, and her most precious ingredients, absolutes, essences, and tinctures she had spent a lifetime collecting from the far corners of the world. This was no longer about creating nostalgia. It was about forging a weapon of exquisite subtlety. Her research was meticulous, a digital ghost haunting the servers that documented Julian Thorne's life. She learned everything. His business dealings were a matter of public record, but she dug deeper. She found the gossip columns, the society pages, the archived interviews. She was not looking for corporate secrets. She was building a psychological profile. She learned of his obsessive cleanliness, his pathological need for control, his disdain for anything he deemed messy or emotional. She learned about his infamous, state-of-the-art penthouse office, a sterile glass cube at the very apex of the Thorn Nexus Tower, with a climate control system so advanced it was itself a work of art. It was his sanctuary, his throne room, and it would be his tomb. Her plan was not to destroy, but to haunt. It was not to bankrupt, but to unmake him from the inside out. She would use his own senses, his own arrogance, as the delivery system for her vengeance. She began to compose a scent, not a perfume, but an atmosphere, a memory that was not a memory. It would be the ghost of Valicor weaponized. She called it Sonder, the profound realization that every random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. But her Sonder would be a perversion of that beautiful concept. It would be the scent of everything Julian Thorne had ever destroyed. The first note was the easiest, the ghost of her own shop. She recreated the exact, heartbreakingly beautiful aroma of aged paper, beeswax, and drying lavender that had been Veliker's soul. But it could not stop there. It needed a heart of darkness. She ventured back to the old cobblestone lane, now a sterile, paved passage between gleaming buildings. She knelt, pretending to tie her shoe, and scraped a tiny sample of the earth from a crack where a stubborn weed grew, the last, bitter vestige of the ground her shop had stood on. She captured the scent of cold, wet stone after a rain, the metallic tang of the new construction, the synthetic smell of the polymers in the Thorn Nexus's own walls. She blended them all, creating a base note that was the very essence of loss and corporate erasure. The final, crucial element was the one that would bind it to him personally. She needed a scent phantom of his own creation. She remembered Larson's cheap, aggressive cologne, the one that had polluted her shop. Through a feat of olfactory memory that bordered on the supernatural, she recreated its structure, but she twisted it. She took its synthetic musk and sharp citrus and rendered it thin, desperate, like the sweat of a liar. She layered it over the base, a whisper of the betrayal that had started it all. The final concoction was a masterpiece of emotional alchemy. In its first seconds, it was deceptively beautiful, alluring the memory of a place you loved but could no longer name. Then, the middle notes would unfold, a chilling sense of dislocation, of something precious being ripped away. And finally, the dry down was pure, unsettling dread, a coldness that clung to the back of the throat, the scent of a ghost that knew your name. The delivery was the final piece of her puzzle. She couldn't simply spray it in his office. It had to be ambient, permanent, untraceable. She discovered the model of his office's climate control filters. She acquired one. In the dead of night, she worked, carefully infusing the intricate, layered mesh of the filter with her sonder elixir. It was a slow-release mechanism. Every time the system engaged, it would push the scent into the air, an invisible, psychological siege. Dressed in the uniform of a low-level maintenance worker, a cap pulled low over her face, she walked calmly into the gleaming lobby of the Thor Nexus on a busy Monday morning. Her heart was not a frantic bird in her chest, but a steady, cold drum. She belonged there as much as the polished granite floor. She was just another invisible cog in the machine of Julian's world. She rode the service elevator to the penthouse level, her tool bag heavy with its singular, devastating purpose. The office was empty. She worked with an assassin's calm, swapping the pristine filter for her own scented one in less than 60 seconds. She left no fingerprint, no stray hair, no trace of her presence. Only a ghost, waiting in the machine to be born. It began, as all the best traps do, with a faint, almost pleasant curiosity. Julian Thorne sat at his vast, empty desk. The city sprawled at his feet like a conquered kingdom, and he caught a whisper of something on the air. It was familiar, a comforting, dusty, warm scent that tugged at a part of his mind he had long since walled off. He dismissed it. A cleaner's new polish, perhaps. A gift from a subordinate. But it didn't fade. It lingered, weaving itself into the sterile, recycled air of his sanctuary. Over the next week, the ghost in the machine began to truly speak. Julian found himself losing his train of thought mid-sentence. The scent was now unmistakable: old books, lavender, a hint of wood smoke. It was the smell of that ridiculous little shop, the Lies Woman's Place. He had the entire ventilation system inspected twice. They found nothing. He changed his cologne, had his office deep cleaned with industrial-strength chemicals. Yet, the scent remained, now deepening, acquiring a chilling, damp stone quality. The smell of a cellar, of something buried. He started to feel watched. In the periphery of his vision, he would catch a glimpse of a shadow that wasn't there. The scent was now a constant companion, a presence in the room. It began to evoke not just memory but emotion. A profound, unshakable sense of melancholy would wash over him for no reason. He'd be looking over a multi-million-dollar contract and suddenly be filled with the visceral memory of being a small boy, losing a treasured toy. The scent was picking the locks on all the rooms in his mind he kept sealed. His impeccable control began to fray. He snapped at Larson during a board meeting, accusing him of wearing that vile cologne, the same one from years ago. Larson, baffled, insisted he hadn't worn it in years. The other executives exchanged worried glances. Julian's sharp, ruthless focus was blunting. He became paranoid, convinced someone was playing an elaborate psychological trick on him. He hired private investigators, cybersecurity experts. They found nothing. There was no enemy he could fight, no lawsuit he could file, no company he could acquire. His enemy was the air itself. The final stage of Sonder was its masterstroke. The dry down, the scent of cold, synthetic polymers and desperate sweat began to dominate. It smelled, to Julian, like failure, like the cold, metallic fear of the stock market crashing. It smelled like the inside of a prison cell. He started having panic attacks in his own office, his heart racing, his palms sweating. His throne room had become a torture chamber. He could no longer work there. He started holding meetings in restaurants, conducting business from his home, but the phantom scent seemed to have followed him, clinging to his clothes, his hair, a perfumed curse. The news stories began to change their tone. Thorne's strange absence. Is the Titan losing his touch? The empire, built on a foundation of unshakable confidence, was showing cracks. Investors grew nervous. The stock of Thorne Industries began a slow, sickening slide. Ilara watched it all from her apartment. She didn't cheer. She felt a quiet, profound satisfaction, as cold and clear as a mountain lake. She had not laid a hand on him. She had not fired a single shot. She had simply held up a mirror to his soul and forced him to look at the emptiness he had spent a lifetime creating. She had made him feel the weight of every small dream he had crushed. It was not murder. It was an exhumation. The final act was one of pure poetic justice. With Thorne Industries destabilized and its founder a recluse plagued by health issues, the board was desperate for a savior. A new, mysterious investment firm, backed by a silent, reclusive benefactor, began quietly buying up the plummeting stock. The firm's name was Velicor Holdings. The takeover was swift, bloodless, and inevitable. The board, eager for a return to stability, never questioned the source of the capital. On the day the deal was finalized, Ilara Lies, dressed in a simple, elegant black coat, walked back into the lobby of the Thorne Nexus. She didn't go to the penthouse. She went to the building's management office and presented her documents. As the new majority owner, her first executive order was a simple one. Julian Thorne, a hollowed-out ghost of the man he once was packing the last of his personal effects from his desk when he heard the commotion outside. He walked to his glass wall and looked down. There, on the plaza of the building that had been his greatest triumph, a construction crew was erecting a new permanent sign, a massive slab of black granite. They were sandblasting it, a cloud of fine dust obscuring the words. When the dust cleared, he saw it, etched into the stone, in simple, elegant, and devastating lettering, was a single name. Not his. It was Lies. He stared, his breath catching in his throat. And in that moment, the phantom scent that had haunted him for months coalesced into a final, brutal clarity. It was the smell of sandalwood and lavender. It was the smell of quiet triumph. It was the smell of her. He understood everything. It had not been a ghost. It had been an architect, building her revenge, one invisible molecule at a time. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply sank into his chair, a broken king in a glass castle, defeated not by a rival, but by a memory he had been too arrogant to believe could ever fight back. Ilara turned and walked away, melting back into the city streets. She did not look back at the building that now bore her name. The victory was not in the possession of the stone and steel, but in the reclamation of her own soul. The fire of revenge had burned away the pain, not leaving her empty, but leaving her clean. She was free. If this story made your heart race or your eyes tear up with just to support this video and keep the fire of silent revenge alive. The world had tried to erase her, but she had written her name in stone upon its skin. She had learned that the quietest voices could craft the most resonant echoes, and that the deepest wounds could birth the most unshakable strength. She was Ilara Lies, and her story was no longer one of loss, but of legacy. Common justice wins if you believe no wound should stay unanswered. Justice wins.